born the daughter of the powerful chieftain of the Quraysh Abu Sufyan. Her frail body, nor father's influence could stop her from accepting Islam. She joined the mothers of the believers and given the glad tidings of paradise. Her name is Habibah Bint Abi Sufyan. Join us for this amazing new chapter in the hit series, Heroines of Islam, with your host lailanasheeba Mondays and Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right here on Sunnahfollowers.
Habibah, who we spoke about last week, the other day, her story is a story of patience. Her story is a reminder of how if we remain patient with the qadr of Allah, how Allah will bring about good results for us. Her story is a story of tragedy that was turned into something great. And the last time we met, we talked about how Habibah was the daughter of Abu Sufyan, who was one of the leaders of the Quraysh. She was the sister of Muawiyah, for those of you who don't know, okay? Habibah, she married the brother, Ubaidullah, who was the brother of Zainab, who was her first cousin. They were cousins. And they were of the first group of people to convert to Islam. Before the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, received the call to prophethood, her husband and her, they never worshiped idols. They were not pagans like Abu Sufyan and so many of the other Quraysh were. They followed the Hanif religion, which was the religion of Abraham, alayhi salam. They never worshipped others alongside Allah. Okay? But when the Prophet Muhammad, excuse me, shouldn't have ate that chicken. I had a piece of chicken. But when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the call to prophethood, her husband Ubaidullah, along with Salama's husband, at that time were amongst the first group of Muslims of the Quraysh to convert, and Habibah converted too. And being that she was the daughter of one of the leaders of the Quraysh, she was persecuted, her and her husband, by her family, by her father and by others for joining this new religion. So when Allah sent down the command to migrate, she and her husband were amongst the second group to leave Mecca and go to Abyssinia. And Abyssinia was where the King Negus was. He allowed the Muslims to live there amongst them in peace and practice their religion. But we talked about how as soon as Habibah and her husband arrived in this new strange land, her husband became curious about Christianity, because this was a Christian land. And her husband began to drink because none of the Arabs felt comfortable there, because this was not their land. They were away from their families, their friends, their businesses, their jobs that they had, and everything else. So many of the men took to drinking, and her husband Ubaidullah was one. He took to drinking. And then one day he came home and just told her, he was drunk, and he told her, I denounce Islam. I am now going to become a Christian. And he told her, I want you to denounce Islam too and become a Christian too. And she had just had her daughter. She had a little girl named Habibah. And she looked at her husband and told her, I would never leave Islam. She said, in fact, I'd rather live out in the woods and eat grass than to denounce my faith and become an apostate like you. And her husband began to, there's some hadiths that say he beat her, that he actually beat her, trying to get her to denounce it, but she refused. So finally, when he saw that even treating her cruelly wasn't going to get her to denounce it, he said, I divorce you. And he divorced her and left out. And when he left, you know, she was wondering what was she and her daughter going to do? Okay. But she didn't have to worry too long because he was killed. Her husband, when he left the home, he was got into a drinking bout and got into an argument with somebody, and he ended up killed. So this still left her in a bad predicament because the money that they had came to Abyssinia with was running low. And she didn't know how she was going to be able to provide for herself and her daughter, especially being that she was the daughter of Abu Sufyan, because at this time, Abu Sufyan was raging war against the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims. So she went to sleep one night, and in her dream, she had a dream that somebody called her name and said, "Oh, Habibah, the mother of the believers." And she woke up from that dream shocked, surprised, because she took from that dream that maybe she was going to marry the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a few days later, that reality became a truth because the king Negus, he had converted to Islam. And for those of you who don't know that, just like Waraka, who was the cousin of Khadijah, he was one of the Hanif scholars. He converted to Islam too before he died. Well, just like him, King Negus had converted to Islam too. And he sent a letter through a maid servant of his to Habibah. And that letter was a letter from the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, asking for her hand in marriage. Well, the letter went to King Negus. King Negus sent the message through the slave girl to Habibah that the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had sent a letter requesting her hand in marriage and asking that if she agreed, you know, to assign herself a guardian. And if she wanted, King Negus would be her wali because he had converted to Islam too. Well, Habibah was shocked considering she had just had this dream, and she was happy. She was so excited that she took off all her jewelry and gave it to the slave girl and said, "Go back and tell the king, yes, I accept. But I want my guardian to be my cousin Khalid, who had migrated with them." Okay. So because of that letter written by the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and her cousin Khalid representing her and speaking on her behalf, saying yes, that's how she was married. She and the Prophet were married through that letter. And this is something very important. It shows that a woman and man do not have to be together to get married. I can get married on the telephone. As long as I have a guardian present, there's two witnesses present, and we agree on the dowry, that's it. We're married. And we don't have to be in the same country or any of that. It can be through a letter. And just like marriage can be done through a letter, so can divorce. If your husband were to send you a text message saying you are divorced, you're divorced. You know, that's how easy marriage and divorce is in Islam. That's why we don't play with them. Okay. So anyway, that's how Habibah was married. And we talked about how after marrying, agreeing to the marriage, King Negus threw a nice walima for her and gave her a necklace as a gift, a present that helped take care of her accommodations for that month. She was worried about her father hearing about the news and getting angry and launching a war, against the prophet. But we talked about how it was a shock. Abu Sufyan, let's put the PowerPoint. This is where we're going to pick up. Abu Sufyan's reaction was very shocking because Habibah and others thought that this would be it, that he would really be angry hearing that his daughter had married the prophet. But the reaction was different. And this is where we're going to begin today. Let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen. Inshallah, everybody can see it. And again, for the kids, that is not me. The kids told me that this was a nice picture of me. That's not me. This is a model. This is some model that some Arabic model's picture. But anyway, let's pick up where we left off. Her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam took place in the 7th year of the migration. And this was a reward given to her by Allah because of her devotion to Islam. How many women will tell their husband that they would live in the woods and eat dirt rather than be married to a kafir? I have some Muslim women that come to my classes who are living in a house with kafir men who they think are their husbands. When a Muslim woman cannot be with a non-Muslim man as a wife for not even a second. Y'all need to learn from Habibah. So Allah rewarded her with this marriage. And not only was this marriage a reward for her, but also this marriage became a means of weakening the hostility and the enmity between the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and her father. Because even though Habibah expected her father, Abu Sufyan, to be angry at her marrying the Prophet Muhammad without his permission, that's not how it turned out. Shockingly, when Abu Sufyan learned that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had married his daughter, he said, Muhammad, is a man who is not to ever be refused for marriage. And he approved of it. Because remember, guys, Abu Sufyan and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam were foster brothers. They were not only related as cousins, but they were both suckled by the same woman, like Abu Salama was. They were all brothers because they were suckled by the woman named Tamima. Tamima suckled them when they were first born. And before the Prophet Muhammad became a prophet, him and Abu Sufyan were best friends. They used to hang out together. They were very close. But religion becomes a means of separating us. So Abu Sufyan was happy to learn that his daughter had married the Prophet Muhammad because, number one, Abu Sufyan loved his daughter. And he worried about her being over there in that strange land. He tried to get King Negus to send her back, but the king didn't. Okay? So he was worried about her. Everybody heard the rumors about her husband becoming a drunkard and getting killed. So quiet as his kept, Abu Sufyan was very anxious about his daughter. So when he received the news that the Prophet had married her, he was happy because he knew the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an honorable, trustworthy man, and that he would take good care of his daughter. And that's why he said, if he asked for your hand in marriage, he's never to be refused, because there's no better person to have as a husband other than he. Okay, so that shocked her. So Just like with Salama. Remember, we talked about Salama. Salama, came from a noble family too. Okay, she was the daughter of a leader too. Remember, her cousin was Khalid bin Walid. When Khalid bin Walid learned that Salama had married the Prophet Muhammad, this softened his heart. And Khalid bin Walid said, wait a minute, if my cousin, my sister married him, he must not be a bad person. If my sister married him, maybe I'm missing out on something. And as a result of Salama's marriage to the Prophet Muhammad, Khalid bin Walid converted to Islam. Well, just like with him, the same thing happened eventually with Abu Sufyan. He began to rethink his position with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? Because of the Prophet marrying Habibah, the Quraysh understood. They eventually learned and began to understand that the Prophet Muhammad was not their enemy. Instead, he was still one of their own who only wanted what was best for everyone. Listen to what Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, tells us. He tells us that when Allah sent down the following verse of the Quran, he sent it down in regards to this marriage. The verse where Allah says, in the interpretation of the meaning, it may be that Allah will grant love and friendship between you and those whom you now hold as enemies. Ibn Abbas said this verse was revealed after the marriage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Habibah. And Ibn Abbas said that this marriage was interpreted as being for the purpose of bringing friendship between the Prophet and one of the leaders, the greatest leaders of the Quraysh, which was Abu Sufyan. Remember, I tell you guys all the time, you will never understand the Quran until you learn the hadiths. Every verse of the Quran was sent down because something happened. If you want the true tafsir of the Quran, you have to learn the hadiths. The hadiths are the explanation of the Quran. So that verse was sent down as a result of the Prophet marrying Habibah. Allah said, perhaps Allah will grant love and friendship between you, those whom you hold as enemies now. Okay? So, remember we talked about how every wife that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married, he married for a different reason. Okay? Well, there were many reasons behind this marriage, not only to unite the Quraysh with the Muslims, but there were other means as well. For example, Habibah, radiallahu anha, she had sacrificed everything, her family, her home, her possessions, and moved to a strange land due to her love and devotion to Allah. This impressed the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just as he was impressed by S.A.W. Remember, he married S.A.W. under the same circumstances too. You know, back in those days, a woman of faith, a woman that will stand on her own without a man for the sake of Allah, that's a woman worth having. That's a woman that no man could refuse. A woman that puts Allah first and foremost, even over her husband. Nowadays, if a woman stands her ground against her husband, a lot of men call her a sinner. Well, a lot of these brothers today would think the Prophet's wives to be some sinful women because a believing woman would never sacrifice her relationship with Allah for anyone, not her husband, not her children, or anything else. Okay? We got Muslim women today, if their husband, and I heard this is happening, I heard this today, that because of the war against Islam that's going on, some Muslim men in America have already come home and told their wives that they don't want them to wear hijab anymore. Can you believe that? Now, if Habibah's husband had come home and told her that, she'd have told him, I'd go out and eat dirt. How many of you Muslim women have taken off your hijab and taken off your jilbab because your husband said he don't want you wearing it no more because we are in bad times? And I heard this today from a non-believer. When I went on my appointment, the lady that was doing my appointment for me, she told me that. She said, there's some Palestinians. They're like you. She said, they're Arab like you, but they're from Palestine. She said, they come here and I do them, and they didn't have hijab on. They told me they're not going to wear it anymore because these are dangerous times. She said, so I'm surprised to see you come in still dressed like this. See how weak we are. You know, the prophet's wives, these women were strong women. They never compromised their faith for anyone or anything. And that was admirable. And also she proved her devotion too, because despite her husband apostating, and despite him beating her and being cruel to her, she withstood all of this and refused to allow herself or her daughter to be dragged down by him, even after he divorced her and left her on her own. So this is another reason why the prophet married her. He said, this is a woman that's strong. This is a woman that needs to be with me. Okay? And again, even though she was in Abyssinia, rumors still get around. Everybody in Mecca had heard about what happened with her husband. And when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the news, he didn't think for a second. He said, I want to marry her. And that's why he sent that letter to the king. And not only did he marry her, but he took care of her. So Habibah became an example to all Muslims of how a religious life requires you to be resilient, to be able to handle your tests, your trials with dignity, humility, and balance. And that's something that I try to, reinforce with my female students here, all of you sisters here. We're going through some harsh times, but we're not experiencing nothing worse than what those companions did. The same way Habibah and Sauda and all these women could handle themselves with dignity, humility, and balance, so do we. Understand that Allah doesn't put a burden on any of us that we can't bear. He's going to test us according to our strength of faith. All we have to do is believe in ourselves and believe in Allah first. Believe in Allah first and foremost, and then believe in ourselves. That's all we need to do. Habibah believed in Allah, and she believed in herself after that. Okay? So she's an example of that, and also an example of patience. She didn't complain. She didn't go crying and running down the street and slapping her face. She withdrew. She withdrew from the other people and just was alone with her Lord. She made dua to Allah, asking Allah to give her the strength to overcome her hardship. And he did. Okay? And also another thing that comes out of her marriage to the prophet is marriage by proxy. That's the dalil. Her story is the dalil that, again, a woman can be married in a letter, on a telephone. You don't have to be present to have to do a marriage contract. So a lot of fiqh come out of this marriage. Okay. So let's talk about it. What happened? Well, after they were married, again, Habibah is an example of patience. She stayed in Abyssinia, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent money to her on a regular basis. He cared for her and her child. According to some sources, guys, after he and her were married, they did not get together.
Three more. So I take away 7.
Okay. After she and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were married, they did not consummate the marriage or live together or even see each other until 6 years later. 6 years later. 6 years later. We got a bunch of you women running around here begging and crying and going crazy because I want to be married. Here's a woman that was married and didn't get to be with her husband until 6 years later. And during those 6 years, the Prophet sent letters to her on a regular basis, and he sent money and provisions for her. So he took care of her and her daughter for 6 years, and he checked on her through letters and through messages sent back and forth. See the patience and the resilience that this woman had. According to Tabari, he said that her marriage took place in 7 AH when she was 30-something years old, and she did not get to see him and live with him until he was 60. I mean, he was 60 and she was 35. That's what they say. When she married him, she was 35. Okay. And she didn't get to see him until 6 years. That's a long time. A long time. It wasn't until the mosque of Medina was completely built that the Prophet sent a letter to the King Negus telling him to send the Muslims back to Medina to him. And the king sent the Muslims in 2 ships. And Habibah was accompanied by Shurabil ibn Hassana. Okay? And check this out, guys. It wasn't until 6 years that she was finally able to be with her husband. And guess what? This is also when the Prophet married Sufiya. Isn't that something? Subhanallah. Subhanallah. The Prophet had 2 new wives, Sufiya and Habibah. Subhanallah. Let's talk about this. On the day that Habibah and the Muslims from Abyssinia arrived in Medina, this was right after the Battle of Khaybar, guys. This was after the Battle of Khaybar. And remember, at the end of the Battle of Khaybar, that's when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recognized Sufiya to be the daughter of the granddaughter of Aaron and married her. Well, that same day that he married her is when Habibah or Habibah arrived in Medina from Abyssinia. So the Prophet was happy that day. He was happy for 2 reasons. Number one, he was happy that the Muslims had won the Battle of Khaybar. And he was also happy because the Muslims from Abyssinia had finally arrived to Medina. Now, this shows how our Prophet was not like no regular man. We did the story of Sufiya last week. Remember, after marrying Sufiya, the Prophet was so attentive to her. She had lost her father. She had lost her brother. She lost her uncle. She had been dragged through the battlefield and seeing the dead bodies of her people. That's a trauma, a traumatic experience. But the prophet took the time to talk with her. And remember, he talked with her. He didn't have sexual relations with her. He sat there and spent the whole night talking to her, counseling her, calming her down. And right after that is when they arrived in Medina. And after he made sure that Sufiya was in her home, he then had to go meet his new wife that was not new, that he had married 6 years ago, but never seen. He had to run to Habibah to welcome her. What man can do that? What man can be attentive to two women's needs, plus deal with the jealousy of Aisha, the jealousy of Hafsa, and the attention seeking of Zainab? Y'all see how the prophet was a man like no man today. Let's hear about what happened with Habibah. Subhanallah. When the prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knew that the ship would be coming in from Abyssinia soon. So he had an apartment already built and prepared for Habibah. She had the last apartment. Her apartment was the one furthest away from the mosque. Okay. So when the prophet had ordered Bilal, he said, when the Muslims arrived from Abyssinia, he had told them, take my wife, Habibah, to her apartment. Because remember, the prophet had just married Sufiya. Sufiya had to be dealt with first because she was Jewish. She felt alienated. She was traumatized, having lost all the men in her family. So when the prophet arrived in Medina, he told Bilal, he said, go take care of my wife, Habibah. Take her to the apartment. Let me spend some time with my wife, Sufiya, to get her settled. Okay? So Bilal took Habibah to her apartment. And when she entered her apartment, she found a broom. And so what she did was she got busy fixing up her apartment. She swept out the room, and then she had with her a cloth made from camel hair that she had brought with her from from Abyssinia. So she laid it down on the floor. The Prophet Muhammad was at that time still dealing with Sufiya. That night, that evening, when the Prophet came to finally greet Habibah, he walked inside the apartment and he could smell this lovely fragrance of myrrh and frankincense that she had burning. And he saw this beautiful cloth made from camel hair on the floor. And this is the first time he had seen Habibah in 6 years. This is the first time she had ever seen him. And remember, he just got back from the Battle of Khabar, just got through dealing with Sufiya, calming her down. He walked in and saw the apartment and he smiled. And he said, oh, Habibah, Qurayshi women know how to decorate and turn a dwelling into a home, unlike the Bedouins or any other Arabs. Subhanallah, see how he complimented her. These words were said in appreciation of her cleanliness and her quick skill at setting up a home and making it inviting. Look at him. This is admirable. What man does this? Gosh, he made each wife feel special. Each wife feel important. Each wife needed certain attention, and he gave them that. Subhanallah. What a man, what a man, what a man. And Habibah, her affection for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very great. In fact, we have an authentic hadith where she tells us that she used to call him my beloved. That was the nickname. They said whenever Habibah spoke about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she didn't say the Prophet of Allah. She would say, my beloved, my beloved, my beloved. That's how much she loved him. Her nickname for him was, oh, my beloved. And his was, oh, Habibah, which is beloved too. Can you see how the Prophet had a special relationship with each one of his wives? It's like a fairy tale, man. Okay. And Habibah didn't just love him. She loved anything and everything that belonged to him. And this is proven by what happened when she arrived back into Medina. After this is when the Hudaibiya treaty, which was that 10-year treaty that the polytheists of Mecca had contracted with the Muslims. Okay, but this treaty became broken when the Meccans incited the tribe of Bakir, who were affiliated with them, to go against the Huzay tribe, and they attacked them. In fact, these people were Muslims, and they were making salat. They were making salat when the tribe of Bakir attacked them and killed them, massacred them while they were all in sajda. Okay, so that ended up breaking the Hudaybiya treaty, and this happened right after Habibah had arrived in Medina. Okay, and when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard how these Muslims were killed so savagely while praying, okay, he was so upset. And one of the survivors came seeking help from the Prophet. And the Prophet said, of course, I'll help you. And that's when he consulted with the other companions, and they made the decision to attack Mecca. This was what led to the conquest of Mecca. So you can see, guys, Habibah, radiallahu anha, she didn't get to be with her husband until 6 years later. And right when she was with him, he ended up dying not too long after. The Prophet, she didn't have much time. She didn't have much time with him because he died after the conquest of Mecca. You all know that, okay? But to prove how much she loved him, when that Hudaybiya treaty was broken, her father, Abu Sufyan, he didn't want the Muslims and the Quraysh to go back to fighting, okay? So he tried to rectify the problem. He came to Medina wanting to try to keep the treaty. He met with a few people, including the Prophet, Abu Bakr and Umar, but they all refused to talk to him. So as a last resort, Abu Sufyan decided to visit Habibah, his daughter. And he entered into her home and was about to sit down on a cushion, but she moved the cushion away from him. And he was surprised. He said, my daughter, is the cushion not worthy of me, or am I not worthy of the cushion? I want y'all to pay attention to her answer.
This is actually the only page I forgot it.
I want y'all to pay attention to her answer. He said, oh, my daughter, is the cushion not worthy of me, or am I not worthy of the cushion? She replied, this cushion belongs to the Prophet Muhammad, and a filthy non-believer like you can never be worthy of sitting on it. Subhanallah. Again, we love our parents. We love our husbands. We love our wives. We love our children. But if they go against the law, They go against our religion. They go against our prophet. That's where we draw the line. Because love for Allah comes first. Love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes second. And we do el-bara. We show el-bara against anyone or anything that tries to oppose that. Does everybody understand? Habibah looked at her father and told him, a filthy kafir cannot sit where the Prophet of Allah sits. And remember, she hadn't seen her father in years. This is the first time she'd seen her father in years. But her love for her father did not outweigh her love for the Prophet. So what did Abu Sufyan do? Well, Abu Sufyan was surprised. And when she said this to him, he replied to her, he said, my daughter, you have but changed since you left us. And she answered him back. She said, no, Allah has honored me with Islam since I left you. So again, that shows her love for the Prophet. And this is the first time her and the Prophet have been together in those 6 years of marriage. But she loved him. He provided for her. He maintained her all those years, her and her daughter. He sent messages back and forth to her to check on her. How many of you brothers do this? He had 11 wives. You brothers only have 2 or 3 or 4. And you don't check on all your wives like the Prophet did. A lot of you don't let your wives feel special. You don't make each wife feel that she's special. And all you got is 2, 3, or 4. SubhanAllah. It's really sad. Okay? So, her response to her father is a beautiful example as to what a Muslim should do when somebody who is against their way of life tries to impose upon them. Because no matter what the relationship is, even if it's our close relatives, you know, our allegiance is to Allah, to the Prophet and the believers, not to the unbelievers. So when Abu Sufyan received this response, he had no choice but to leave and go back to Mecca. And he was unable to hide his shock when he told the people of Mecca who had gathered around him that they could forget about a peace agreement. He said, I have never met a tribe of people more devoted to a person as the Muslims are to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's where we're going to stop in her story right here. But I want you guys to imagine this. 2 wives who were freshly married, well, freshly with. The Prophet handled Safiya, and we talked about how after the Battle of Khaybar, the Prophet didn't have a place for her. Remember? So she had to stay in somebody else's house while they build her apartment. The Prophet had only prepared the apartment for Habibah. Okay? But even though Safiya was staying in someone else's house, the Prophet still met with her and made her settled and let her know that he cared for her, he loved her, and she was safe and she was okay. And then that evening, he went running to Habibah and made her feel, oh, only a Qurayshi, because she was his cousin. They were cousins. Only a Qurayshi woman knows how to turn a dwelling into a home, a house into a home. And he was able to hold her, meet with her. Finally, after 6 years, I can finally be with my husband, my man. Can you imagine the happiness Habibah had to felt? And on the other hand, guys, you remember we talked about how jealous Aisha was of Safiya. Well, she imagined how jealous she was now that Abu Sufyan's daughter was here too. She had two more co-wives to worry about taking her man. Okay? So the prophet had to deal with Aisha too, and Hafsa and her temper, and Zainab. Remember, he had just married Zainab. He married Zainab right before the Battle of Khabar. And Zainab wanted attention. Oh my God, what a man he was to handle all those high-strung women, those confident, high-strung, beautiful. And they were all beautiful. They said Habibah, remember, she was the prophet's cousin too. They say she was beautiful too. Okay, her, Zainab, and Salama. Her, Zainab, and Salama were all cousins. They were all beautiful. They all looked like him. And then you had Safiya, who was beautiful too. She was the granddaughter of Aaron, the niece of Moses. God, he was able to handle all of them women, those strong women and their characters. God, wished it were me. I wished it were me. Okay, we're going to stop right here for today. The next time we meet for this class, which will be Monday, we're going to pick up from where we left off. We're going to talk about what happened now that Habibah is settled in. How did she get along with Aisha and them? And what about her father? What about her father? What about her brother, Muawiyah and them? We'll pick that up on Monday. So I'm going to stop right here.